and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. Now, I'm glad to welcome Ari Stone, who's with us today. Ari is the Global SVP for Value Engineering, Solution Consulting, and Services at Ivalua. So, hi, Ari. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hey, Kelly. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, before we get in today, teaser, we're going to do some predictions. Everybody loves end-of-year predictions. But before we dig into that, let's learn a little bit more about you. Can you talk a bit about your professional journey to this point?
So I've been with Ivalua for just under 5 years. But before joining Ivalua, I spent 16 years at SAP, specifically SAP Ariba. And then before getting to software, I spent time in the consulting space. So I spent about 8 years between KPMG and Accenture. Here at Ivalua, I feel like I've got a dream job. I get to, as Simon Sinek says, focus on the where, the what, and the how, the what, and the why. And I've got those responsibilities here at Ivalua in the sense that my organization has influence over value engineering. So we talk about why customers should embark on initiatives. We talk about what they should do with, how our products or how procurement can help them. And then we talk about how to go embark on that journey, because no one wants to actually just buy software without having a good plan for achieving outcomes. We've got a couple other teams that I'm responsible for globally, but that kind of gives you a nutshell of the teams that I work with. When I'm not on a plane like the one behind me, you can find me typically out running around. Wherever I go globally, I try to go for a nice run. Anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. So.
Excellent. Well, given how much enthusiasm you clearly have for helping procurement teams achieve all that they can, it'll be interesting to hear, we ask all of our guests this question, what is it specifically that you love about procurement?
Well, I find the reason for how I got into procurement somewhat maybe strange compared to others, maybe not. But I was a little analyst at Accenture, and I was working at a large brewery in Colorado, and I stumbled on supply chain. And the partner said to me, every company always needs to focus on efficiency, reducing risk, compliance. So it's really a safe place to be. And I thought, well, gee, I'd like to be in a safe place, make money, and move my career up from there. But little did I know that it was going to be a change in the next 25 years from where it was. At that time, CPOs weren't chief procurement officers. They were at best vice presidents of procurement. And so we've seen a ton of change. And what I love about it is we have the ability to make such an impact on our organizations, on our people, and the world itself with the types of suppliers we choose for the environment, and the impact that has to the efficiency that we can bring to an organization to where they can invest in human capital to improve the business alongside with technology as well. So for me, it's about being a change agent in an organization and in the world that I never thought I would say about sourcing and procurement.
Well, and if doing that work and being more efficient and being more reliable can put a beer into the hands of more people, you sort of get an opportunity to spread that love right out of the gate.
Yes, nothing wrong with spreading, nothing wrong with a beer in someone's hand.
Now, as we get into our predictions today, we have a lot of procurement things we're going to talk about, of course, some tech things, but I like the idea of starting with a big picture. You talked about the role that procurement and supply chain occupy within a company. Certainly all companies are dealing with global forces, dealing with competitive forces within their industries. When we look towards next year, thinking at that big picture level, what are some of the trends that you expect to see either within or among large enterprises?
Yeah, so I think a lot of them are still trying to digest Gen AI and AI in general. I think it's probably been one of the hottest topics this year. And so I think 2025 will be that make or break. Is it a blockchain type of excitement? Or is it something that's really going to be part of our organizations overall? I think consolidation of businesses is going to be a factor as well. Data, I've said this at some of the procurement conferences that I've spoken at, but I think that procurement has so much information that can allow an organization to be strategic. I think data, maybe even calling chief procurement officers, chief data officers, maybe. Please don't go and change your titles, but I think that they can really influence how companies make strategic decisions. You've got risk management, you've got transparency of that risk, the supply chains. I think the outcome from an election coming up could have some impacts there. And then I think the workforce changes. I think the workforce is not the same workforce that I started in. And I think we'll see some things there. So, 5 or 6 areas where I think we'll see some big impacts to organizations in 2025.
Now, let's dig into a few of those and think about how either they will impact procurement directly or what procurement should be thinking about now, given the range of possibilities. I feel like given how buzzy it's been, we have to start with generative AI. I think there's still a lot of learning, but certainly this year we saw it go from sort of visionary to like companies really starting to test and implement and roll it out. If procurement wants to get to be part of that story, a player in those pilots and situations, what types of skills and know-how do we need to be investing in, either building or hiring in now?
Yeah, so one, I agree with you that I don't see it like a blockchain phenomenon. I think that blockchain, from my perspective, was something that most people truly still didn't understand. And I could probably be one of those folks. But with Gen AI and AI, I think it's just so much of a tool to help us in our day-to-day jobs. I think you'll see it go from really automating processes and making things more efficient and streamlined to really improve decision-making. And so then when you think about the skills that you need to have, now you're talking about procurement going from working with a source-to-pay solution to now talking about experts that understand AI models and how do you do prompt engineering and such like that. How do you move from doing sourcing and negotiation activities to really how do you leverage the information and knowledge that you're getting from the sources of data that Gen AI can provide at your fingertips? I mean, think about it, going from reading contracts in 3 or 4 hours that are hundreds of pages to getting summaries like Cliff Notes in 3 to 4 minutes, all consumed at one time. And then what do you do with the time that you have? And so I think it just allows you to reflect more as opposed to finding yourself in procurement as opposed to overseeing procurement. To me, that is tremendous benefit that every procurement professional can see. I mean, organizations are still struggling with talent and scarcity of talent. And I know we may dive into that, but what I look at as Gen AI is that one event that we've had so far in our lifetime, or at least in my career, that has really felt like it's unfolding the ability to leverage people and technology together.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And to your point about maybe facetiously all the chief procurement officers changing their titles on LinkedIn to chief data officers, I think the thing that's interesting about that is that you're not saying data is going to be procurement's only focus going forward. It's more of a signal to the rest of the organization that procurement has unbelievable quantities of data, and that quantity of data is incredibly instrumental to the rest of the enterprise being able to hit their targets. How might that cause chief procurement officers to start thinking differently about their role, both in terms of what they attempt to achieve within procurement, but also to the types of projects and conversations they get involved with beyond procurement?
I think the procurement role is, it started out as, hey, handle this contract that I've already negotiated for you because I need something executed. Now they are able to proactively be involved in the business. And I think that when you look at the procurement professionals as they talk to their colleagues in other parts of the business, for them to help them understand the basics of what procurement is aware of that they don't communicate. What's the impact of the risk of that supplier that you might be doing business with, or potentially setting up operations in that part of the world, right? What is the impact on ESG, localized networks or localized supply chains? What is the impact potentially of of a war in some part of the world, and how does that disrupt the ability to get product to a certain location or even ship product to our customers that might be around those impacted areas. And I think the more that procurement talks this way to its stakeholders, the more that folks look at them as, I want them at the table before I've made decisions, as opposed to after I've made the decisions, and to complete the mess maybe that I put forward for the company and see how you can minimize the risk that I've created. But that to me requires, again, going back to a different type of skill set. You've got to have the balance of knowledgeable people, but then the types of folks that you might be hiring are really relationship players that can kind of move pieces around like the chessboard that's out there.
Well, and I think too, procurement has talked for a long time about positioning, reputation, how are we seen internally? Everybody loathes being faced with, oh, you guys only care about savings, right? That's sort of like the worst thing procurement is going to hear. But if you think about that situation you talked about, okay, we're watching this commodity market. We're concerned about conflict in this part of the world. You're not going to have that kind of a conversation with anyone in procurement and then turn around and in the same breath say, but you guys only care about savings. Right. And so it's sort of like breaking that notion by simply moving on to bigger things. Now, the other thing I want to talk about from a data standpoint, you mentioned that we may see some consolidation in some markets. If you're a procurement person and you've ever been through M&A activity, or even business units that historically have operated independently and the decision is made that it's time to start bringing things together, I think at least as a starting point for procurement, that is something of a data challenge. What might be some of the strategic considerations or projects that procurement would embark on if they find themselves in one of these companies where some type of consolidation is happening?
It's a great question. And I do think that 2025 is going to be about that. And so we have a customer or prospect that we were talking to, or that we've been talking to, and they are in this situation, two companies coming together. And luckily on my team, I have a former customer that's now part of our team. It's pretty cool to be able to talk with her about this, but she went through something very similar because she was part of a company that became two companies to one. And what's exciting about it is I think procurement sits there and thinks, oh, how can we get cost savings, right? Back to your point earlier. But I think what it's more about is how do I understand the suppliers across two companies? Yeah. Maybe one supplier's performance is better than the other supplier's performance, right? Maybe the risk of a supplier based on where they're located, maybe how they do business, maybe their financial background is better than one or the other. So as companies go through that clean room where two companies are looking at what the assets are, I think procurement is front and center to help understand their supply base. Yeah. I think the contracts, something that we overlook all the times about contracts is I might have a volume-based contract with supplier A, but so my new company wasn't using that supplier. And all of a sudden, I might be able to reap benefits by adding the volume of both companies together against supplier A's contract if I had assignment rights. And so there are things that with legal that procurement can help orchestrate from a supplier perspective, from a contract perspective, from a risk mitigation perspective, for the supply chains themselves about where they might be located. So all of this data that procurement has and can bring together the two companies, they've now got to find a way to crunch it fast, right? They've got to find a way to be more efficient. And then that's why I think things like Gen AI are here to stay. How do I chat with my data? I mean, it's a big thing that we talk about at Ivalua about how do I chat with data, right? I mean, I want to throw something into my AI assistant and have it give me information back and tell me what the trends are associated to that data itself.
And my understanding, generally speaking, about mergers and acquisitions is that if an outcome doesn't meet expectations, it tends to be, and I will apologize to you, Ari, in advance, and to everybody listening, this is such a consulting word, but it's because the expected synergies are not able to be reached. And synergy is just a nice, clean, fancy word for thinking about bringing together, comparing those contracts, looking at the prices that have been negotiated, leveraging the new combined volume, and making sure that you do truly get not just savings, but operational efficiency, procurement has an incredibly key role to play in that, either in defying the odds and having M&A activity be more successful than the market might expect, or in simply preventing those expectations from being missed. So that is a key visibility opportunity for any procurement teams that are looking to sort of elevate their status internally.
Completely agree that word synergy and being that I spend it is so I'm with you, but I think about if you then think about the tenure of procurement, I go back to me 25, 28 years ago, procurement wasn't at the table, right? Today, I see more and more executives consulting procurement proactively, right? And so now as you see mergers happening, you don't hear that as often of saying the synergies weren't there, right? And I believe that if I was in the business world, right, and I was embarking on potentially an acquisition, the group that I would be talking to the most is procurement.
Yes.
Right? Is bringing them in. And if I'm in procurement, I'd be raising my hand saying, hey guys, let me explain to you what we can bring to the table. Don't say I need to be there. Explain why I need to be there.
Yeah. Now, it's funny you brought up getting that seat at the table, because depending on the company, and we know there's trends in both directions, today there is literally no one sitting at the table because a lot of teams are still remote, are still hybrid. And we've seen an awful lot of trends and things changing in the overall workforce over the last few years. Fortunately, we started to recover from most of the negative workforce effects of the pandemic. I think we were able earlier this year to declare the Great Resignation officially over, so things are starting to stabilize. But when we look forward, either in terms of current ongoing trends coming to an end or potentially new trends starting up, what are you expecting to see in the workforce next year?
One, it's been interesting because there have been a bunch of announcements about companies requiring going back to that 5-day work, right? Here at Ivalua, we have a couple days where folks are supposed to be in the office. And I think it's because our culture is about people working together, right? So it is tougher that you and I are here on a web call, right? But we're able to interact on some levels. I can say that, my passion for flying, I believe, there have been commercials about companies that say, I'm going to meet with my customer, right? And I believe that we need to be able to meet with our customers in person, that there's nothing that takes away from that human interaction, even no matter what Gen AI can do, no matter what automation can do for us, but people and technology together is really important. But if you think about the workforce itself, when I entered, there were the baby boomers that were more in my role today, right? And then you move on, and now you've got Gen Zers entering the workforce. Their expectations of what work means, we need to listen to, right? And some of them may feel that for this job, I don't want to be in the office 5 days a week. We have to see whether or not they can be just as effective or even more effective. I always laugh that when I started out in my consulting world, we didn't travel with laptops. And I literally would fly to a customer, right? I would work Monday through Friday. I would leave on Friday, and I wouldn't think about the customer all weekend because I had no access to technology. Today, I've got a phone that's got a full data plan that I can do almost anything with. I mean, there's not a time when my office ends, right? So whether I'm around the world meeting with a customer or whether I'm, just at a kid's baseball game, my technology is with me. So I think the big thing that we need to think about, especially in procurement, is not just the shift in the age of the talent, but what are their interests? We have to figure out ways to make our roles exciting. The word procurement doesn't just bounce off and say, social media, evangelist, right? And so it's those kinds of things that, but there are some really cool things. So for example, an AI, sourcing expertise or specialist, right? Or thinking about how do I take Gen AI and combine that with prompt learning, right? Or prompt models and stuff. I mean, there's ways that the role is shifting to where, how do I take the data and be an architect? I remember there's those risk analysts folks, right? That put together how much you pay for insurance or what your life insurance is going to be. Well, in many ways, that whole risk assessment activity, which is a very lucrative area of the business, procurement's in that every day. We're about risk, right? And so I think when you think about the roles, you think about the people, we have to keep that in mind every day about what we do.
I do think it's interesting too, because we can look at this sort of top down, right? What are these big workforce trends and how are they impacting people staying in procurement, choosing to come and join and start a career in procurement? But to your point, especially about generational shifts, we can also look at that from the bottom up. So when you think about the ongoing journey procurement has been on to reshape their internal brand identity, we talked about getting away from just savings like, hey, we talk about risk and war too, right? There's some drama. We do some different things. We're involved in M&A. But if you think about this new generation of professionals, hopefully more of whom choose to enter procurement than those of us that have been here for a little longer that tripped and stumbled and opened the wrong door and ended up in procurement for some unique reason, that in and of itself from the bottom up is going to start to change and evolve the internal brand reputation that procurement has. Any guesses or observations about how a more tech savvy generation, more digitally literate, right from the very start, full digital natives entering the workforce and joining procurement's ranks will start to organically change how we're perceived by colleagues in other functions?
Well, one, I think that from what I see with a lot of the younger folks coming to the market, they dealt with a different world that we met, right?
Yeah.
I mean, videos everywhere. There's TikTok, there's Instagram. So they're out in the world and they're used to maybe more presentation. They're used to giving a compelling argument about things. And I think those are things that, that might not have been the reason why someone got into procurement 25 years ago, right? Like I said, mine was the safe choice, right? But today, negotiations, some people love to argue, right? What you'll see about them bringing to the table, we've got great little things like, electronic signatures and, reviewing contracts on mobile devices and, negotiating, flying places, working and closing the deal and all that stuff. So I think that the younger generation, what it will bring is that different way to look at it. Then that's maybe, I don't want to say the word stodgy, but that way of this is how we do it, I think don't disrupt it even more than what the technology has disrupted, that the environment is disrupted, that regulation is disrupted. I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm a procurement professional and I'm not thinking about what regulations are coming my way and how is my technology going to adapt to that regulation that I'm not aware of, we tend to use this word future-proof, which I think people think the future is 5 to 10 years out. And I think the future is so fast now that it's 6 to 12 months out. I mean, Gen AI a year ago today was when we launched our first Gen AI capabilities in the product. We had AI all over the product, but Gen AI and allowing our customers and our partners to really leverage technology. And where we are today, less than 12 months later, it's mind-boggling of the efficiencies we can provide customers, and allowing them to really be experts on information that might have taken them hours or days to become experts on. So I feel like, the one thing that I also will say about these newcomers into the market is they like to balance a lot, right? I see it myself going, how do people do this? I got 3 kids and they're going all over the place, the sports and choir and, gymnastics, whatever it might be. But the newer generations, I mean, they're just accustomed to, hey, I don't need a car. I get someone to drive me. I'm doing my texting while someone's driving. All these capabilities that are in front of them, I think are going to be a dynamic that will really challenge the legacy folks like myself.
Yeah. And I'll include myself in that too, right? That sort of old, because we've always done it this way. Why? Right. Yeah. You need somebody to say, okay, but why? Why have you always done it that way? And I think some of what you said that really resonates with me is around expectations on time, both how will I spend my time? Where is my time most valuable, but also response time. And one of the parts of the business where I think procurement has a massive opportunity to have positive contributions is around advanced management and response time when it comes to situations where there's a risk. And we've seen there's been so many geopolitical stories. You also mentioned regulation. There are so many companies, if they're not headquartered globally, they're operating globally or have global supply chains. And so knowing what's going on in all of these different parts of the world is becoming an increasingly core part of procurement's responsibility. Now, I do feel like we should date stamp this, Ari, just because we've got a big election right around the corner. You had mentioned earlier. It's October 29th. Ari and I don't know. So depending on when this episode airs, this is unsuspecting Kelly and Ari. We have absolutely no idea which way this thing is going to go, but we know that geopolitics will impact procurement and supply chain 2025 and beyond. No change there. But is there anything specific that you have an eye on that might happen, or in the areas where procurement should be focused on being ready regardless of what happens?
Well, I think luckily with COVID and some of the other impacts, there used to be this whole concept of just in time, and anyone that actually was inefficient in procurement actually was better off when COVID came about, because they had large inventories of materials to build, right, and to make product, whereas we had the disruptions. And so procurement's learned, hopefully, of how do I handle supply disruptions, or is focused on how do I minimize or improve my resiliency in my supply chain. But depending upon which way the election goes and the outcomes, I think there's a couple of things that everyone needs to be aware of is, will we be looking at continuing down the path of more localized supply chains? That could be because of natural disasters as well, right? It could be because of conflicts around the world, military conflicts around the world, or it could be because of maybe political decisions that are made. Or do we find ourselves more in a collaborative environment to where we continue to press forward with supply chains around the world? I mean, I remember reading articles about the impressiveness of Boeing, building the Dreamliner with having part manufacturers all around the world and bringing it together. And you saw those big planes that brought different components of the planes to one location for assembly. And I think we'll all be having to rethink that depending on which way when the political actions go, but the military conflicts and our continued natural disasters that continue to happen around the world.
Now, Ari, we always like to wrap these conversations with sort of a piece of advice, a little nugget to send people off with. We stay on brand. We consider it sharing the love. And I think in the context of our conversation today, in just a couple of days, we're going to flip the calendar page to November. But this is a deceiving time of year because even though we have 2 pages left on the calendar, there are a lot of holidays baked into that time. So we don't have the number of days. We don't have the hours that we would at other times of the year. And with so many trends at large, trends within procurement, we have a very finite amount of time within procurement to start to get ourselves ready for next year. What advice would you like to leave listeners and people watching this conversation with around how they should make decisions about how to spend the scarce time remaining in 2024?
So and I'm doing the same thing, right? I've got a team of almost 80 people within my organization, and understanding that the world is going to continue to change, that we're going to see some impact either way in November in the US especially, right? Depending upon which way elections go. What I would say is, one, identify your change agents and reflect on yourself as whether or not you are accepting change. Are you prepared for the unexpected? Are you willing to accept it and then adapt to what comes your way? I always, when I post something on LinkedIn, I always hit #BeDifferent, because I believe that winners are different. Yeah. You get folks like Tesla with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. They didn't do what others did, and that's why they're successful. They're different, right? But as you're reflecting on yourself, you need to reflect on, well, what kind of training am I going to put forth for my team as a leader? Right? What kind of skills am I going to put forth? Is it going to be the traditional negotiating and contracting skills that I might have had my sourcing professional people do? Or am I going to look for, how do I teach them some of this new Gen AI capabilities, right? To allow them to at least be able to decide, is this something that's going to help them? overall. And then honestly, being able to handle the accelerated pace of business. I would spend the next 2 months to be planning out what business is going to look like next year, and come up with different plans based upon different things that happen. If COVID and the global events over the last couple of years have helped us understand anything, is no matter how prepared you are, you're unprepared, right? And so for me is accept that and then plan for it, right? Build in that risk model to address.
Yeah. Now, we'll have to check back. We'll give it a few months, but we'll have to see how you did with some of these predictions.
Okay.
Ari, if people are meeting you for the first time today by listening to or watching this conversation, what would be a good way to learn more about you and potentially to reach out and connect?
I think the network, LinkedIn is probably the best way. I try to keep up on it. So please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you and learn more about them as well, and those folks that are listening in. And obviously, if you disagree with what I was thinking, please share your thoughts, because I'm here to learn every day and adapt.
And as you said, don't hesitate to #BeDifferent. Ari, thank you so much for joining me today.